To start off with today, we are creating the two halves of our silicone, and by doing so, the two halves of our model mold as well. A general rule of thumb when it comes to mold making is that you want 2 pieces of silicone per piece you are attempting to make a mold of. We have 2 legs to make molds of today. Each leg will require 2 pieces of silicone. We need to split these 2 pieces of silicone somewhere, and where we want to split them is where we will build our silicone wall. As you can see here, I've chosen to split both the legs in half down the front, leading to a left and a right half of each leg. There are positives and negatives to choosing this arrangement. The biggest negative is that we will end up with a seam running straight through our knee. The knee has a lot of details compared to the broad forms on the side of the legs. This means retouching will be harder and our skills will be tested more. I am personally very comfortable with retouching seams in most materials, so I don't mind potentially having to resculpt some details in the knees. The biggest positives with this seam placement is that we will have an easy time making the 2 halves of our model mold. Let's say we chose a seam like this, running along the sides of the legs. Because of the very limited space we have behind the legs, the back half of a model mold made with this arrangement of silicone walls would likely have to be split into 2. We would also run into the issue of the silicone wall on the inside of the leg on the left, touching up against the base, which could end up being awkward when we go on to remove the leg, cut the silicone. I've deemed it a reasonable risk to run the seams like I'm doing here, knowing very well that my retouching skills should be up for the challenge of retouching the seam running through the knee. You should notice that I'm not only making molds of the legs here. I'm also including the base where the feet rest into these 2 leg pieces, as you can see here in yellow. The reason for this is that it's much harder to align a thigh and an ankle so the legs doesn't look broken as compared to only aligning the thigh. The base is of a lot less importance than the connection between the ankle and the foot, of course. If there is a need to adjust the base to make sure the leg piece fits where it needs to fit at the thigh, that's not going to be a problem. If I have to resculpt the ankle or make compromises to the volumes of the thigh to make sure the leg lines up with the ankle, now this is a big problem. Minimizing risky areas and attempting to push alignment problems into areas where they will be much more forgiving is always going to be a good idea, something you should be trying to do. Resculpting a base in hydro resin or in any other material is not a large issue for me, as it's ambiguous in its surface at best and not truly meant to represent anything solid. The bones and forms of the leg and ankles are of course very important, and they are not ambiguous at all. Any alignment issues here would ruin whatever illusion of life that we've been able to create in clay. You should always try to consider the entire process when making your mold. That means considering carefully the use of your mold while casting the figure. How will the mold function when it's being cast in? How will the pieces be put together once cast? All these things are considerations that should be made before attempting to make your mold, and the more answers you have to these questions, the better off you are likely going to be. The silicone I use is a paste-based silicone, which is applied by hand. You'll find links to the brands and online stores that sell this material or similar materials in my FAQ post on Patreon. If you want to know more in depth how I go about mixing the silicone, you can check out the previous video, or the 2 previous videos actually, in this series, where I go into much more detail about mixing my silicone. I'm using two separate catalyzers here to execute my plan. The pink silicone you've seen me use is the same silicone with a different colored catalyst. The difference in color signifies the difference in setting time. This is entirely idiosyncratic, by the way, to this particular brand of silicone. Other brands might have other ways to signal a difference in setting time between catalyzers. The yellow catalyzer sets really slowly. Usually we are talking about hours at the minimum, depending a little bit on temperature and how much catalyzer you add. If it's warmer, it will set a little bit faster, and if you add more catalyzer, it will of course set faster as well. This slows you down a lot when you only have a short section of a silicone wall to build. The silicone also has a tendency to sink and sag, and the longer the setting time is, the more this becomes an issue, the more opportunity there is for the silicone to sag. With a fast pink catalyzer mixed into the silicone, I have somewhere around 10 to 15 minutes to work, and in 30 minutes time or so, I should be ready for the next layer, meaning the silicone will be set up within 30 minutes. This is a huge benefit. It means I'm not left waiting around for silicone to set up, and my work can be continuous and efficient. There are multiple steps made when building a silicone wall. First, you must build a small triangle shape. This is a stable shape that you can make fast and easily. It serves in general as a height gauge for your wall, while the bottom of the triangle begins to set the width. You want to have a little wiggle room to go wider and taller in the upcoming layers, but this first iteration of the wall gets pretty close to where you eventually will end up being. The stage where the wall is triangular also needs to be thick enough so that the top of the wall is not bending under its own weight. You also don't want so much silicone up there, by the way, that it can't support itself and begins to droop and sag. So there's a delicate balance there that only experience will give you the answer to.